We're happy to have everyone in this room today learning more about understanding community foundations and building stronger communities together. We're all part of this in our communities, and we each play an important role. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Greta Stark-Kraker, the Executive Director at the Central Minnesota Community Foundation. I've been in the field of philanthropy for just about 24 years in various roles, so I can be a resource for any questions you have after this too, and during we're here to help. And ask Terri.
Terri Foster with the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation. And I have a much different background. I had a marketing and business background, and about 8 years ago needed a change, and so I fell into this job and am so fortunate to work with philanthropy and help our community. Again, I may be a resource, but I think also oftentimes as we get older, we find out that maybe we learn that we know less and less, and especially as change happens so quickly. So I am here, but we're all learning together, I think.
So as we talked about with Central Minnesota Community Foundation and the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation, we are a part of a bigger organization called Community Giving. And Community Giving is a collaboration of community foundations united under a single framework to create efficiencies that maximize the impact of our donors. Collectively, Community Giving administers over 1,100 funds, totaling over $225 million in assets. So we all work together, and we're lucky to be a part of Community Giving. We get great service from them. It just gives you a little history on where we come from and our roles and how we got where we are. What is a community foundation and why is it important? Webster's Dictionary says it's a tax-exempt, non-profit, publicly supported philanthropic org that serves a defined geographic area. When we talk about growing community foundations, a lot of times they start small, maybe with a school district or one town possibly. Sometimes it's multiple towns, like we work with Rocori, that's Cold Spring, Richmond, and Rockville. We also work with Foley, which is one of our smallest foundations in the partnership with Central Minnesota Community Foundation. The smallest ones, such as Foley, usually start with one event and focuses mostly on scholarships. The Rocori Area Community Foundation, in the middle, there's what's called an associate foundation, so that's the next level up. So they go from a leaf to starting to grow their tree on our logos. Rocori is in growth mode. They do a large event. They have multiple funds, including agency funds, donor-advised funds, and community funds that go back out to make competitive grants in the Rocori Area Community Foundation area. CMCF is a full partner, so we're the big tree. We probably should have made the tree a little bigger. We have an ED, which is myself, and other directors, and supports the smaller community foundations, including Rocori and Foley. And we focus on donor development and community leadership and community impact. So this slide kind of just shows you the partners when they're established, the asset size, the number of funds, the staff size, and total grants awarded. You'll see Rocori and Foley are listed as being supported by CMCF. Community Giving was established in 2015. We work at Central Minnesota Community Foundation as the 501c3, and in 2015, we changed our name to Community Giving so we could raise up other communities and have a local presence called Community Giving and not have state-called staff going to Brainerd and Wilmer, I said Wilmer twice, and Paynesville. So you can kind of see by the longer that they're established, what their asset size and the number of funds, how the growth trajectory goes. Oh, there you go. So launching your journey kind of shows you again. When you start at the beginning, you're really just launching your journey. You're going from good to great. You're focusing on local communities, raising funds, meeting donors, working with professional advisors, and then in long-term impact, you're looking at community impact in your community. So for example, we have our Women's Fund, which supports women and girls in our community. We have a fund called Friends of the Gardens, which we work with the city on, that supports those gardens. It's a great partnership, so that's really a piece of the community impact that we do in our community.
Okay, I am going to talk about next about governance. And as many of you know, board governance is a very important issue. And supportive ambassador program for your foundation. Also empowers your executive director, and vice versa. Your executive director can empower your board members and community members. And we like to focus on 3 areas primarily, and we'll see if I forget something here, but hopefully Greta will help me out. We think that board governance is really an important aspect of growth for a community foundation. We also think that growing your assets and asset growth is paramount to having a successful community foundation. And what do you think the third thing is? No one's going to help me out here? How about community impact? Your grants and how you're making an impact in your community. And so those are kind of 3 areas that we're going to be talking about today. And so your board governance. Every organization is going to be different. Everybody has different strengths. Everyone has different agendas and different perspectives. And all of those perspectives are necessary. As we've heard from some of our keynote speakers, sometimes that creates challenges and opportunities to maybe better understand somebody else's perspective, to think of new ideas and ways of doing things, to also understand when we make mistakes, how we can maybe do it a little different next time. So with the board governance, it is really important, first and foremost, to have a diverse board of kind of all the skill sets and things that you need to be successful. And sometimes that looks different because we're all different. And at different times, you might have a stronger board in one area, or maybe might be missing some things just because you haven't found that right person yet. And so we really recommend using a board matrix. And so we have a board matrix that, kind of has all the demographics. So like if you're an area community foundation or regional, making sure that you have representation from kind of some of your geographic locations, or at least recognizing where there may be some gaps. Also, diversity in ethnicity, if I can say that today, excuse me, as well as skill sets. Who's had nonprofit experience? How about finance experience or business? How about relationship building experience? Who's got those networks that you can maybe tap into? Who is also putting their money where their mouth is? Who's got that passion? And most people you would think on a board are very passionate. And we heard about, from one of our keynote speakers about why people are on boards. I think truly understanding why they're on the board and what makes them tick helps us make sure that we have strong, resilient boards and that we're all paddling in the same direction. So that's really important. And so we have a governance committee that meets twice a year, typically. And our governance committee is made up of our past 3 executive directors, goodness, guess I'm gonna be going out soon. Our past 3 board chairs, our current board chair, and our executive director. And what we look for is kind of who's going to fill kind of some of those skill sets and needs, and who maybe can help with addressing some of the impact and understanding the needs of the community, and who is also going to help us connect into those groups that we talked about, and who also can help us be successful in getting the word out. And all of these folks have to have something else we've heard in our keynotes: values and integrity and trust from the public, right? And it's also necessary for us relationally to have all of those. Otherwise, you can have a dysfunctional board, which I think we've all seen at certain times. And that's not really fun to be a part of. And nobody really wants to be on a board and volunteer and give of their time when it's not fun or impactful. So sometimes we have to go through some mud, as I tell my kids. And sometimes your boot gets stuck and you need somebody to help pull that boot out. And hopefully you've got, and I know I've got somebody in here I'm looking at on my board that has helped me pull out my boot, so thank you. But you just keep trudging along. I think with the board governance, you got to also recognize that you need to look forward to who do we need in the future, because you know when people term off, we have three-year terms for our board members. We've had some discussion with some of you in this room about that's too long. What if you need to get rid of them? That's a question, right? What if somebody isn't in there? And I think you need to be able to have that discussion about it's okay, maybe the time isn't right, maybe you've got personal stuff that's come up, and maybe, you know, just give them the approval, the okay to say, maybe you step back for a while, and that's okay. And we appreciate what you've done for now. Other board governance, like I said, just really about the values, understanding the roles, setting kind of that mission of vision, mission, and values. For us, strengthening local communities for empowering community foundations. I was in Dr. Kathy Allen's presentation. She talked about sometimes our vision and mission are not always the same on our boards. It was kind of mind-blowing for me, as it is what we're trying to do and the impact we're trying to create in the community. Sometimes it's a little different in our boards of how we create that impact. And so I think that's something we should all maybe think about is, so our mission is to engage people. In the community, we want people to be engaged. We want them to understand who, first of all, the Community Foundation is, how we can help, how we can all work together to build this great resource for the future to make sure that our communities are thriving. And we also want to connect them to passions that they care about and to some that they don't even know about yet. And then building community. Together, we're all doing that. Our values, you can read those: community, integrity, commitment, innovation, optimism, diversity, generosity. We need all of those things in order to be trusted and respected and to build those relationships and build community. Oops, guess I was supposed to go on to this one. So, how about this question? Does your board have a process for identifying new board prospects and new leaders? I see one head shaking, 2 head, 3 head, 4 heads. Okay, so we also started an Excel spreadsheet of potential board members. And we keep that going. If they kind of work their way up the list a little higher, I will do a little stalking on the internet and figure out their roughly the age and what they've been involved in, and if they're currently on too many boards, you know, whatever the case is, so that we kind of know a little bit of information before we go and ask a few. And then we have board members that go and meet with them, and then we bring that information back and make a recommendation to the board. So this is all through the governance committee, of who we feel should start on our fiscal year in July. And do all board members annually donate to the foundation? Really? I see quite a few heads, that's great. So we also ask, we know everybody gives at different levels and everybody gives of their time, treasure, and talent differently. And we appreciate that. But we also know that if you're not putting your money where your mouth is, how are we going to go out and ask the community to help us? And again, it's just one of those values and aligned missions.
Okay, so now we've talked a lot about board governance. Let's move into finance and investments. It's not my favorite thing with numbers, but you get to deal with them as an executive director, and thank God we have community giving, who has a strong investment committee and a finance committee that we can get support from that foundation with. So you want to make sure you have adequate operating support from diversified sources, such as grants, donors that give to your operating campaign, and actually there's some administrative fees that get attached with the funds that are set up that help us operate the way we need to operate and have an operating reserve. You want to think about how your funds are invested for your donors. Do you have multiple investment pools that they can choose from. In our organization, we ask donors to make a recommendation. They can't tell us where to direct the funds because once they make the gift to the foundation, it's legally a community giving gift to spend, and they got a charitable deduction, so they can't tell us where. They can recommend it to the board, and they can change that once a year. The foundation has 4 different pools. We have strategic pool, which is the balanced pool. It's 80% equities and 20% fixed. We have the moderately conservative pool, which is 40% equities and 60% fixed income. We have the socially responsible pool, which a lot of donors are into these days. Responsible is 80% equities and 20% fixed. We also have what's called the Bremer Partner Pool, which is 75% equities and 25% fixed. The fees can range from 0.31 to 0.76 on those investment fees. That helps to cover the fees for the investment firm that we work with. And donors can recommend, again, which fund they'd like to be invested in. So they're just some high-level things of finance and investments. If you want all the details, talk to us about a finance and investment committee meeting. They're 2 to 3 hours. So a lot of times when a foundation starts, I've talked about some of the smaller foundations like Foley, and then we have like Ricori, we've got Don in the room here, our board chair, and they're thinking about maybe at what point do we add a full-time staff or a part-time ED? You really have to make sure that you have enough funding for 2 to 3 years before you bring that person on, or they're going to be fundraising for their own pay. And that's not a good place to be as an executive director or on a board. So you really want to make sure that you're building your endowment so you have operating funds that you can put towards hiring an executive director. We have Paynesville represented in the room today too. We help them grow and hire an executive director. They're adding a different director right now due to an unforeseen circumstance, but we're so happy for Paynesville to be growing. They've taken off and they've spread their wings under the leadership and support of Central Minnesota Community Foundation, and we are just pleased to stand beside them and watch them grow in their community and support Paynesville. Another thing to think about with operating is, are you going to have a remote office? Are you going to have people in an office? Are you going to pay rent? Do you need to get a phone system? How many printers do you need? What are your office hours going to be? Are you going to have closed doors and then it's appointment only? Those are all things that you really need to think through before you hire an executive director. And are you going to need admin support, or can you do it yourself? Because that's a lot to take on yourself as a new executive director when you're trying to be out meeting with donors and professional advisors, building those assets for the foundation to be doing all the administrative tasks.
Before I get into marketing, I just want to ask, how many of you here have a full-time executive director? Can you raise your hand? How many do not, but are hoping someday? Okay. Part-time, yes, and part-time versus full-time. So, the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation, and I don't know if all of you know the story of how the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation started. In 1998, we were started, and around that time, a little bit before, we had some community leaders who, one was in investments and finance, one was in realty, and one was also in business, and they were strong leaders. And they said, hey, we want to have a vehicle to make giving easy, somebody that's understanding our community needs and somehow saving and making sure that we're ready for the future, to make sure our community thrives. Around that same time, Wilmer was having some of those same discussions. And so those leaders went to the Central Minnesota Community Foundation in St. Cloud and said, hey, how do we get one of those? Can you help us, please? And they did. And so they started, helping, supporting. We call it the Paying It Forward model, which community giving and all of our local partners do and to support each other. And so we were able to have some guidance. And sometimes it started off as volunteer boards. It started off as very part-time executive director. And in late 2016, our first full-time executive director was started. And so at that point, we were about $7 million, I believe. $7 million. We're almost, can we go back to a few months ago when the market was really good? I don't know where we're at now, but we were almost at 25 million, okay? And so, and today it just keeps going up and down. But I was gonna say, at that point, I think that was something that really changed, where some of those seeds that full-time boots on the ground person was able to help with, and we really grew. And so I'm very thankful for the Central Minnesota Community Foundation and being part of community giving. And that also birthed community giving, which was formed in 2015 because of these needs and understanding that if somebody could provide kind of the secret sauce and the basic templates and tell you how many committees to have, how many board meetings to have, the 3 areas of focus that I talked about and what to look at, then we could probably be more successful. And so it really does help us all be more successful. And then in talking about marketing, told you I had a previous life. I have a background in marketing, marketing, did events all over the nation. I've, did a lot of marketing. I understand, what makes people tick? What do they want? They want to be a hero. They want to feel good. They want to understand. They want you to know what they're worried about and what they're scared about. They don't want to be made a fool of. And they want to trust you. And marketing sometimes gets put with our friends. I know, those sales guys, right? And so can they always be trusted? So what you say, and this is something that is so true, just like we heard with the Minnesota Star Tribune, that brand, making sure that people know and understand trust and integrity. And so as executive directors, as board members, as community foundations, as leaders in this room, you guys all understand the integrity and that trust. And I keep talking about these, and these are the same values and same things that are brought up over and over again, because you cannot sell anything permanently or over and over again unless you have trust and a win-win situation. And that requires a relationship. And one thing that I found out is I thought I was really good at storytelling in all of these businesses and for-profits that I worked at. I could understand, okay, what's the benefits? What is going to benefit the client, right? And in our case, the donor. And then I found out, oh crap, if I get that story figured out, that's only part of who we're serving. And so here are some of our markets. And I just had one of our new board members, who we call him the nonprofit printer of the Brainerd Lakes area. Lakes Printing does a lot of work for all of our nonprofits. And we're very appreciative of him. And he's a very good storyteller. Again, been in it for 30 years. And he just came to me yesterday and said, oh, I just heard we need a different story for the professional advisors than we do. I'm like, yeah? Are you feeling my struggle? After 8 years of being here at the Community Foundation, I brought a lot of marketing, and I think I hopefully helped elevate some of our presence and understanding, but I also have more questions. And I'm not sure what does resonate with that particular market and the audience. And so there seems to be, because community foundations are so multifaceted, they serve so many different audiences, from the nonprofit sectors who call you about, I don't know if I can make payroll, we have this project we want to do, can you help us? To trying to meet our own operational goals and fundraising, to asking about the endowment, which many of you are trying to do to build that endowment, and that's not usually very sexy to ask for. We found that it's a lot easier to ask for, hey, would you come alongside of us and help us build our giving that we're doing this year, the funding that we're giving to nonprofits. We have some projects that aren't fully funded. Can you help us? Well, that seems to be an easier ask, right? And you're not specifically asking for yourself, so it seems a little less greedy and easier to build relationships. And so all of these audiences and professional advisors, most of our referrals come from professional advisors. And then we have that thing that I talked about earlier, change. So what we were doing a few years ago isn't really working as much today, because Professional advisors perhaps have additional charitable arms. We have more and more people that are going online to do things, just like the Minnesota Star Tribune mentioned. And so they can build a donor advised fund, a charitable fund really quickly. And why would I want to use the community foundation? And so that story is so important, the story of impact. And one thing that I think I know is that people really want to support and they want to help others. Minnesota is Minnesota nice. We've all been through stuff. And we've heard earlier too with Dr. Eric Jolly talk about showing up, isolation. Think about some of your worst times. And when somebody shows up and is there and walks through the mud with you and pulls your boot out, you're building relationships and you're understanding their perspective. And it's at that point when you might begin to understand their why and where you can maybe build a marketing message that, that resonates with them about their why. So, the marketing outreach. Does the foundation have regular outreach with its donors? Again, regular outreach with its donors, with the professional advisors, making sure you're having one-on-ones with your donors, trying to get the legacy gifts, making sure you're meeting with your board members, making sure that you're meeting with your community leaders, making sure you're understanding the community needs. I'm tired. That's a lot of messaging. And again, all very different messages. And again, it's changing so fast. So has the foundation segmented and ranked its target audiences? Okay, segmented and ranked. Not really sure. This past year, we've had some time limitations, shortage of staff. And so one thing that became apparent to me is I said, okay, if I can do one thing, only one thing right now, what am I going to focus on? And I said, donors. I'm going to focus on our current fund holders and our current donors. I'm going to build those relationships because I know they've already have some of those shared values and beliefs, right? They know at least our name, and they know that we're not the Brainerd Lakes Area Economic Development Corporation, right? And so maybe that's the easier crowd to upsell. You want fries with that, right? And we know that they're generous. And so reaching out to them has been something that I've been trying to do. And if I can just share super quick, some of you have heard this story, but my coolest moment and something I'm most proud about this last year is working with our Grants and Committees program, Community Programs and Grants Committee, okay? Basically, they all review all of our difference maker application grants. And we have an online scoring system, again, all through community giving. And then we get together and we say, hey, do we want to bring some of these folks in and hear their presentations? And so we have some finalists, and we do that, and we listen, and we talk, and then we choose how much money should go to which organization and who should we fund. Tough decisions. And last year, we chose to support a difference maker grant. $15,000. Again, we're still growing. We're not Central Minnesota Community Foundation. Certainly not, I heard Eric Jolly say we don't have enough money. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, no offense, right? But we don't. None of us do. And so it's all about perspective. But we gave $15,000 and to one particular organization. And then a few days later, after the board approved this, I think it was like 2 days, 6:30 in the morning, I'm getting ready in the morning, and I get a text message from one of our nonprofits that said, hey, can you call me? Can you talk this morning? And so I said, sure. I said, I'm just getting ready. Why don't you call right now? So she said, okay, well, I just want to thank you so much for the grant, and we really appreciate that. But it's not really, I don't want to seem ungrateful, but it's not enough to do what we wanted to do. And so, we also have this other opportunity that came that, can we adjust our grant a little bit slightly? And I listened to what the change was, and I said, yeah, I think that would be fine. And then I heard that she was having a meeting that morning at 10:30 in the morning to look at this vehicle it was a used vehicle at our car sales place and in town. And so we talked about a couple potential donors because she said, I need to jump on this quickly. This is like an opportunity that came up that we might not have again. So we talked about a couple potential donors, how she could maybe get some funding, and didn't seem like that was gonna work. I was able to make some phone calls. I didn't say anything. I called a few donors who I knew had supported that or maybe would like to support because of those relationships I built, right? And by 10:30, I stopped in at that car place, knocked on the door with the general manager as he was getting cornered to donate part of the vehicle. It was a big box truck with a lift gate. The other two people from the nonprofit were in there, and I walked in and I said, hi, can I come in? And I said, how's it going in here? And the general manager said, well, not very good. They're trying to corner me into donating some things. And I said, oh. And there was also another vehicle. They were looking for a Sprinter van to deliver things to homes from the food shelf. And so long story short, he said, you've got some news. And I said, well, we have a few more dollars. We're now up to $55,000. And he said, well, I suppose you're expecting me to donate. And I said, yeah. He's like, well, what kind of names do you have? I suppose somebody said, well, he's going to have to pony up too. I smiled big. Mm-hmm. So I said a couple names and how much we were hoping for, and he did. A few days later, we kept reaching out to additional community leaders and foundations, and $15,000 went to $110,000, fully funded their project, something they didn't have to wait for. So that building relationships and that trust and integrity are at the key to all of your marketing. And no matter even if you just do a newsletter, reaching out, talking to a donor, saying thank you, just start building the relationship and be really genuine. I was just going to talk about the marketing examples. And Greta, if you wouldn't mind just sharing really quickly some of these that are on the page.
Sure. We have Chrissy in the room here. I want to call her out. She's in the front here. She does our marketing. She does an excellent job. On the left there, you'll see an example of our quarterly newsletter that we started doing during COVID. We did a lot of emails, but we learned later that people are really tired of emails. Getting that piece of paper in the mail is kind of nice. For now, anyway. It'll probably change again. And included in that newsletter, we have a section called Taylor's Tidbits, which is a new piece that we've added where we feature 2 nonprofit agency funds that we have at the foundation, and we reach out to them and have them do a little 1 or 2 minute video about a project that's going on right now in their organization. And then that communication goes to all of our donors and professional advisors and friends of the foundation. So it gives the nonprofits some marketing for them too, and it's also a connecting piece for our donors. Ricori does what we call the Trivia Night. That's an example of a flyer that we put out for Trivia Night. That's a success. Easy event to do. They do a good job putting it together. The board does a great job. On the top, we have an example of our social media. We did International Women's Day. That's our team on the top there. And on the bottom right, we have our Dancing with Our Stars, which is our Women's Fund event that we do on June 9th. So if anybody's in town on June 9th and wants to see Dancing with Our Stars live, give me a call. We'll hook you up.
How much money did they raise last year?
$463,000. And that went to 6 local nonprofits. So the people that dance choose their local nonprofit as long as it fits in with the guidelines of supporting women and girls.
Wonderful. I am going to just pretty much say ditto. We do newsletters, and this last year, again, I told you, I didn't have much time. So newsletters didn't go out, and I was going home mad because I didn't get the newsletter out. And then somebody asked me, do you think somebody's waiting to get your newsletter? I'm like, oh, probably not. But it's a nice to have, right? And about the communication and touch pieces. So again, doing whatever you can, I think, and just trying to prioritize that with whatever segment you think you're working on and creates the most impact is what's most important. And then again, about the message.
So another key piece of community foundations and community leadership is asset development. How do you get the money in the door? How do you build those relationships like Terri talks about with the trust in the community, between the foundation, the community, the nonprofits, people moving into our community, and how do you build those relationships? So things that we like to talk about when a new foundation comes on, make sure you do your tax receipts right away. So get the gifts in, get the thank you out, you'll get the tax receipt from community giving, but then in addition, as executive directors and our development teams, we handwrite a personal note for all gifts that come into the foundation, because whatever size gift it is, it's a meaningful gift to the person that made that donation, and that's a nice touch point to have. Just communicate with them. Pick up the phone, send an email. You know your style, you know your donor style. Whatever is the most comfortable for you is going to build that relationship. And don't forget to connect out with your professional advisors, your accountants, your attorneys, your financial planners. Build those relationships, because that's where your referrals are going to come from. About 95% of the referrals come through a professional advisor. Some ways that we do asset development relationships are with donor meetings, one-on-one. We do community activities. At one point, we did a thing called Get on the Bus. We partnered with United Way. We literally got donors on a bus and went around to different nonprofits and did site visits. And then we went back and had time to chat and answer questions from the nonprofits. We do professional advisory events. So right now we're doing Brews and News. Terri does an event in Brainerd too. Is yours News and Brews?
It was, yeah.
It was News and Brews. We share ideas. So thanks, Terri. And then it's a casual event. We bring in a professional advisor to speak on a topic, and everybody has a cocktail if they want to, or a pop, and just network and learn about a hot topic. And do grant making.
Okay, so member number 3, community impact, I talked about, right? Community impact or grant making and community leadership. Again, really hard if you don't have a full-time executive director. More difficult, right? You don't have those boots on the ground, and so you're relying more on your board members to hear, and community leaders, what's going on and what some of those needs are. We have heard from different variations of our board going back to almost the beginning, where, again, there wasn't much money. There wasn't enough money then either, right? And so they did small grants, 500, 1,000, right? And so, again, like Greta said, that was big to them, right, at that time, and probably also a little bit more impactful than it is today, right, $500 or $1,000. But through the years, our board and our committees have decided that they wanted to try to create more impact, and so we have switched to a difference maker annual grant round. Again, maybe giving between $70,000 to $110,000, $150,000, but also hoping that we can be the catalyst to bring people together and increase that giving, right, and fill some of those needs. And again, the relationship side of things. Greta was talking about the Get on the Bus tour, where you go and you tour kind of some of those nonprofits. We have been doing some of that where, you know, we've had some of our donors call and say, hey, do you know about this nonprofit? Can I show you? And so they'll bring me to that location and share information, and I'll learn about a nonprofit that is important to them. Remember, that's their why. And then sometimes we will say, hey, let's bring some donors who participated in this example I gave earlier. Let's bring them to go and pack meals at this nonprofit who they helped provide a bus, or the van and the truck to, and let them experience the values of that nonprofit and let them experience what that impact made. And so some of those things in grant making can really be helpful. But does your foundation have a system for grant applications and review? As I mentioned, it would be really hard for us to do that as a standalone with 2 people in Brainerd, okay? So we rely on community giving, and they have those processes, that secret sauce that I was talking about, the technology. And so we have a system, whether some days we like it or not, right? Certain things of it, but they have a great grant process. So all of those applications can be customized. People can, we do scholarships the same way. And then we have scores. And so Lisa is on our grants committee as well. So they go through and they score those applications. And then we come together and discuss that and make our decisions. And we don't necessarily always follow what the rankings are based on the scores. But I think this is important because a few years ago, our Women's Fund was doing their own grant applications, okay, in a Google Doc. And we talked about that and we said, okay, but it's easier because we can manage it and we don't have to work with community giving or anyone else to oversee it. But then we also talked about what about the past history, or what about a nonprofit who didn't get selected to receive it? Are we making sure that we're following proper processes and procedures and that we have reasoning as to why? And so these processes are really important to demonstrate that you have gone through a formal process and that you've had some reasoning and discussion, and those rankings give you not only that history, but then you can start to look at kind of those trends. Who have we supported? Where are some of the gaps? And it really helps you, I guess, again, the integrity and growth of your organization. Does your foundation have the resources for developing community initiatives? Again, probably not, right? We all need money. So we have to work together collaboratively. And I hope in our next keynote session, when we talk about some of those challenges of giving, we know that today we're going to need to all work together to meet the needs of our community. And it's not just the Community Foundation's Difference Maker Grant, which, by the way, I also figured out this year. This is a key hint. In working with some of our agency and nonprofits, it's not our Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation's Difference Maker Grant and the funding that we gave. It is collectively the community's grants that they gave to nonprofits and all of those who have supported and been a part of the Community Foundation. So another thing we have to try to change in the narrative. We've been giving out the last couple of years 1.1 million through the foundation. Again, I said collectively. And so the last few years, that would mean donor advised funds. That would be our agency funds, field of interest funds, and our collective grant round that we do. About $11 million. Would you mind sharing about that?
So at Central Minnesota Community Foundation, with our recent grant rounds, we had the Thomas Ritchie Youth Grant, which obviously impacts youth in our community, the Difference Maker Grant, focused on mental health this year. That focus area changes every year. We bring in a panel to discuss and learn about the current issues in our community. We have the Central Minnesota Arts Fund, which is for the arts, and we also have the Ricori Grants, which is about building the Ricori area community.
Okay. So, guess what? You guys made it through that. Great job. I just have one final thing to say about those grants. Again, it's not about necessarily how much, and then there's that balance, that dance of how do you build your endowments to make sure that you have operating dollars? How do you build your endowments to make sure that you can give to community through grant rounds in the future? And balance all of that while you're fundraising to pay for your salaries right now, right? And so that's tricky. Again, I think it's about the messaging, the marketing, building trust, and shared values.
So we did a lot of talking. Does anybody have questions for us? We had a lot of stuff to get through, so that's why we talked so much.
Well, kind of.
Do you want me? You looked at me because I raised. Who? I didn't. Okay.
There's one in the back.
Did I understand you correctly to say that 95% of your donations or support come through those professional advisors?
The referrals for them to set up funds.
Really? Mm-hmm. Amazing.
We have a lot of, because we've been around since 1985, we have a lot of relationships that have been long-standing with large firms in our communities. So those relationships started years ago, way before me. I didn't build all those relationships. I have the blessing of carrying on those relationships and meeting with the next generation and connecting the more experienced professional advisors. They're new people that are coming into their office to get to know the Community Foundation and the current and emerging needs in our community.
I I'd just like to add to that that I think, and kudos to Greta, I'm not jealous, well, maybe a little bit, but I do think from more of a grassroots as you're growing, it's very, very important, but I do think some of those come organically, perhaps more, to start with, and I think as you develop those relationships, and again, that trust, and people are doing estate planning and accounting, but they have to know your name, and they have to know that you can help before they can, give referrals, and also that we can help donors.
Anybody else have questions? Okay, well, thank you everyone for being in the room today and listening to us, and I hope you took back a tidbit of information that you can use in your foundation. Have a great day.